Raise your hand if you've ever been injured playing sports. Thank you, please put your hand down. I'm going to make the broad assumption that most of you raised your hand when I asked you that question. But why is that? Why are injuries so common in sport, and how do we train to prevent those injuries? Before we dive into that, I think it's incredibly important to preface the fact that injuries are a part of sport. Freak accidents happen, and there's nothing we can really do to control that from happening. The types of injuries that you and I are going to be talking about today and for the foreseeable future are these acute injuries. Roughly 90% of collegiate athletes will run into some type of injury over their 4-year career. And I think it's safe to say almost 100% of all active adults will run into some type of joint or muscle or strain or any other type of pain or injury within their life. So why are these injuries so common, and what can we do, what steps can we take to prevent these injuries from happening? Well, in order to solve this problem, I think it's important to go back to the root cause of these problems and where these injuries are coming from in the first place. Compensation, unhealthy movement patterns, overuse, central nervous system fatigue, lack of mobility, stability, strength, coordination and proprioception, recovery, developmental issues, and improper techniques are all causes of these acute injuries. Luckily for us, these are all actionable items that we can work on in a performance and longevity training program to help minimize the risk of these acute injuries. Research has shown time and time again that a structured training program has a dramatic decrease on the risk of injury. So what elements do you need to focus on in your training program to prioritize performance and longevity? That's what we're going to get into today, so sit down, grab a snack, and let's go.
Welcome to the GenFit Method, a series designed to break down the science and strategies that help athletes limit injuries and perform better. This is GenFit, where we cut the noise, teach the truth, and prove that longevity starts with how you train.
There are 4 main pillars that come to my mind when thinking about performance and longevity. Number 1, mobility. Mobility is defined as your body's ability to actively control a joint through its full range of motion. Before we dive too deep on the definition of mobility, I think it's important to specify the difference between flexibility and mobility. When you hear flexibility, all I want you to think about is elasticity, aka how far can my muscle stretch? When you think of mobility, I want you to think of how well can I control this joint, whether it's stretched, whether it's contracted, in any phase of that range of motion. Another way to really simply think about it is flexibility is more so talking to your muscles, tendons, ligaments, whereas mobility is talking about your joints. Now, does flexibility play a huge role in mobility? Absolutely. Think about your hip, for example. If I have really tight restricting hip flexors or glutes, my hip's mobility or range of motion is going to be limited because of those tight muscles. I'm not able to get through that full range of motion that I normally should if my flexibility was up to par. So how does mobility tailor itself, or how can you train mobility to help prevent these injuries? Think about a football player for an example. He's running full speed towards the sideline, but he wants to make a juke or a cut to stay in bounds and avoid the defender. When I get down into that cut, I am loading into my hip. My hip needs to be able to bend up towards my body, and then I need to be able to explode out of that cut. Like the example that we said earlier, if I have restrictions through that hip because I have tight hip flexors or a glute or hamstrings, whatever it may be, I'm not able to get into that range of motion of that hip and then fire right back out. This is where we can see an injury take place within that cut, okay? If you have restrictions in that hip because those muscles are so tight that it doesn't allow that hip to move, something's got to go because we're applying so much force into that cut, whether that's a strained or a pulled muscle or something along those lines, or even worse, a tendon issue or an ACL or something along those lines. Training mobility will allow our joints to move in a full range of motion and allow us to have control over that range of motion. This is where we see that limit in these acute injuries take place in the example like the cut. Number 2, stability. Stability is very similar to mobility. Where mobility talks more so about one joint, stability is going to be the culmination of a couple of joints or a movement. We talked about a really explosive cut or juke move for our last example with mobility, so I want to keep it along the same lines here. When we're thinking about stability, okay, with our mobility example, we were talking about the hip and whether you have range of motion to be able to get into that cut. For stability purposes, I care more so about that entire leg that we are going into the cut on. Stability talks about the ability to control that leg that we're cutting on. So if I get deep into my cut, I want to look at what my knee is doing, what my ankle is doing. Are they strong enough and rigid enough to be able to hold that position, or will they give way and shift? I'm sure you've seen those really nasty videos of somebody making a cut and maybe their knee pops out of place or it goes a different direction than we don't want it to. That is the basis of stability. Can I control this fundamental movement on my body within this sport-specific move? Stability, simply explained, is your body's ability to hold this posture, and not so much talking posture as in I'm sitting at a desk, I want a good posture, but sport-specific posture within a sport-specific movement. AKA, can my body hold up? Can it hold its position while I'm trying this sport-specific movement, while I'm putting so much force and power into XYZ movement? Number 3, strength. Similar to mobility versus flexibility. When we're talking about strength, I think strength sometimes gets a bad rep. In my experience, when I try to explain that we're strength training in a program, some people will often get the mindset of, well, I don't want to strength train because I don't want to be this big muscly meathead patty of meat. The purpose of strength training is to not make you look like a bodybuilder up on a stage. The concept of bodybuilding training is called hypertrophy. Hypertrophy, simply put, just means I want to make my muscles larger. Now, hypertrophy training has its applications in sports performance and longevity. For example, if you are a very skinny, very small, very weak athlete, for example, an offensive lineman who's coming in who needs to bulk up, needs to get bigger in size, then we may consider putting you on some type of hypertrophy program just to get a little bit more mass on your body. Strength training is going to be more applicable to performance and longevity for 3 main reasons. Number 1, strength training is measured by force production. How much force can I produce? How much power can I provide within a specific movement? Examples like jumping. Can I jump as high as I possibly can to go get a rebound, to catch a ball, to do whatever? Can I explode out of my cut that we were talking about earlier? Can I do these movements very powerfully, very explosively? That's strength. Number 2, strength training creates denser muscle tissue and connective tissue, aka ligaments and tendons. When your muscle tissue or connective tissue are more dense, they are less likely to tear. So from an injury prevention or longevity standpoint, strength training is critically important to providing us that dense tissue. Third and finally, strength training promotes so much more neural activity within our body, aka my brain's ability to talk to my body. Things such as neuromuscular function, basically what we just talked about. How well does my nervous system, how well does my brain communicate to my body, my muscles and my joints? This greatly benefits us when we're talking about things like stability, balance, proprioception, things along this nature where we need to understand where our body is and how it's moving. Strength training also helps promote motor unit recruitment. A really silly way to think about this is if my muscle is an iPad and I plug it in, what is the current, what is the power that's coming through? Okay, if I'm using some wimpy kind of janky charger, it's not going to charge as fast. My muscle's not going to produce as much force. If I use one of those badass fast chargers, I'm sending a lot more energy to that muscle. I can produce a higher force. Does that make sense? And saving the best for last, number 4, recovery. Recovery is without a doubt the most important facet of performance and longevity. Unfortunately, it's also the most neglected facet. Recovery is when the hard work that we do throughout a day for our sport or for our performance gets applied to whatever metric we're training. Take this for an example. Let's say I go to the gym today and I focus on lower body strength, a little bit of plyometrics, and maybe some sprint work in there. Who knows? I'm just making examples up here. At the end of the workout, my muscle tissue, my nervous system is a little bit fried, things are broken down, I need a recovery process, okay? If I go home and I skip my protein, I skip my meal, I stay up late, maybe I do some partying, some drinking, my body doesn't have time to recover from this workout. So this entire great, phenomenal workout that I just had is wasted away. On the contrary, if I went home and I had a great meal, I had lots of protein, some carbs to refill, maybe a protein shake, and then I got 8 hours of rest, my body now has the fuel to recover and the time within that sleep to recover and promote muscle synthesis, aka muscle growth. So now this work that I did during my workout actually has time to be applied into whatever I'm doing in life. Recovery also goes so far beyond just sleep and nutrition. Things like hydration and even your mental health and your mental state are going to be huge factors towards, can I efficiently recover during this allotted recovery time? A really bad metaphor that I use way too often with some of my clients is the bank metaphor when we're talking about recovery, okay? If your body is a bank and working out is you going into the bank and pulling out cash over and over again, and recovery is the process of putting cash in, you're gonna lose some money pretty damn quick if you're not properly recovering, okay? So the more recovery you can do, the more cash you can put into the bank, the better off you're gonna be. Recovery goes so far beyond the however much time we spent today talking about it, and it's gonna be a huge focal point of this channel going forward. And so for today's sake, I'm just gonna leave you with that, but we'll go into much more depth later on down the road. That's the basis of the 4 pillars of performance and longevity when we're talking about a training program specialized for those 2. And just to recap really quickly what we went over today, we talked about number 1, mobility, my body's ability to control a joint through a range of motion, not to be confused with flexibility. We talked about stability, my body's ability to control an athletic movement and hold that good athletic posture so that I can reduce my risk of injury. We talked about strength, my body's ability to produce a force and also densify that muscle tissue and connective tissue. And finally, we skimmed over some good recovery techniques and how recovery is the application of all the work that we've done throughout the day. If you guys learned something new today, please drop a like or a comment on the video. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to reach out to me personally through a direct message or leave a comment on the video. I'd love to hear from you guys. Like I said before, I want this to be a direct platform from me and the information that is sports performance and longevity and injury prevention to you guys, the viewer, the athletes. I want to keep you guys healthy and find new ways to tailor this training and explain this training so you have something to apply to your own world. I really appreciate you guys sticking around for the entirety of the video. If you're still watching, if you left and you're gone, I guess you wouldn't be hearing this, so screw you. But we'll see you in the next video. Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning into the GenFit Method. Stay connected with us on social media to keep up with the latest in performance, recovery, and the ever-evolving science of longevity. This is GenFit, where we cut the noise, teach the truth, and prove that longevity starts with how you train.